This morning in chapel, we're going to do a couple of things differently. We may get done early, which most of the time that is different for us, but that's intentional. This morning we may want to have you stay around, meet with us, those of you interested in doing some mission studies. This morning what we're going to do in the chapel hour is talk about some of the upcoming missions trips that Clearwater Christian College is scheduling over the next year, as well as just mention again some of the dates that should be on your mental calendar regarding some of the study opportunities and tours that are available to you. One of the goals that we have in your spiritual formation and growth while you're here is that you ought to take advantage of something that is, I believe, formative for you to have a burden for bigger than the world where you'll go back and live. In other words, at any moment, you can get on the Internet and touch any place in the world that quickly. And what you ought to be able to do also is to have in your heart and mind a visual picture of what's going on there, what's happening there, and so you can pray more knowledgeably. If I can put it very simply, somewhere in your 4 years in college, Lord willing and by God's grace, you ought to make a trip, if not for a summer, maybe for 2 weeks, to a foreign field. It may simply be south of the border in Mexico, Canada, it could be down in South America, it could then be in the Asian region, European, Africa. We want to talk about some of those opportunities, and by the way, we're doing everything possible to make that affordable to you. Now, you say, but I'm not thinking of missions. I'm not thinking of pastoral type ministry. Whether you minister in a church here or in a foreign country, whether you are a church leader or whether you are a church member where you are active as a servant leader in that local church, you ought to have a vision for the big world. Somewhere in there you will be involved in praying, working with, encouraging folks, and you may have children one day, brothers and sisters, or you may be very instrumental in counseling someone to pray about and think about missions, foreign missions. And in order to do that, if you can be as informed as possible, God will use you then to be an influencer or an instrument, or probably an opportunity then to just be a sacrificer and pray and give towards helping that cause. Let me ask you a question real quickly. How many of you have a passport? Raise your hand. How many of you own a passport? Look around for a moment at how many of us own a passport or have one. If you sit down with a group of professors or teachers and you ask folks who are 50 plus, how many of you had a passport in college? You would be amazed how few people owned one decades ago. They simply didn't do that. We now do high school trips. We do college trips where you need passports, foreign countries. Meaning you are probably one less inhibited, less frightened to go. Number two, you have the resources that make it possible. And folks and others who now say this is important to you. What we want to do is talk about some upcoming trips that we are planning. And I'm going to just introduce this. Dr. Ralston, who grew up in a foreign country and then came to the United States. And he'll tell you more about his background. For him, thinking world is part of his very being, fabric, because the United States is foreign to him, or was for many years. And then he's come here to study, and now the Lord's using him here. But he didn't grow up here, all right? And so for him, it's like, why wouldn't you? This is part of my being. And he'll talk about that. But this year, what we are planning on doing is for missions trips, where you can go and work and be a part of then a ministry there for days and help them and do ministry. We're going to plan a trip for South Africa, May of this academic year. For some who would like to minister here in the United States, you've heard Ian McConnell. There are other pastors that we will be working with in conjunction with Ian. We're talking of also putting together some trips that will take us more than just the Philadelphia and New York area, but that's what we're calling the Metro Mandate. That's also going to be happening in May, June of this year. That one, we'll be talking about some of the prices a little cheaper. We are planning a trip for just a little over a year, about 14 months from now, to Argentina, and that'll be December, January. That'll be our Christmas break a year from now. And then next summer, not this coming summer in 2008, but a year from now, 18 months, a trip in Europe. We'll talk about that, as well as a trip to China. This year, this school year, there are also 3 study trips, tours taking place. One to Europe. Dr. Ralston's heading up that one. That's spring break. Then there's the trip to England. Mrs. Kitty Anthony's heading up that. That one is May 9 through 19th. And then there's the trip to Greece, the study trip to Greece. Brother Carver, do you want to talk just for a moment again about the dates for that one? That is May 24 through, and the days following in Greece. 8 days. 8 days in Greece. So we have Europe, we have England, Wales, and Greece's study tours. Every year there are planned study tours. And our goal is to try to put on the calendar between 3 and 5 trips then. And so in your 4 years, that means all of you will be exposed to a minimum of 20 opportunities to open our eyes and hearts wide open to what God's doing. You ought to take advantage of that, all right? So that we can think world, and maybe God will do. And down the road, it's not a secret, it's prayer. We would love to see some foreign opportunities to study short, whatever. That may not happen any time in your education career here. It may not even happen in the next cohort. But wouldn't that be wonderful if you could even do part of your studies someday and then come back and having experience? If you're a business major, to having done something internationally. Very difficult to put those things together, but perhaps as the Lord opens doors, that could become a reality. That's something you ought to pray about that for the next groups of students that come. We talk about that. We'd love to see that happen, but the Lord still has to open opportunities where an accredited institution can work with a foreign recognized credit institutions. But wouldn't that be great to be able to do part of your studies, for instance, in Greece and then benefit from something like that? It'd be a dream that students have. And we talk about things like that. Can't plan them yet, but we're talking and throwing out the questions, meeting with people. And so that's something that's on Dr. Draper's heart all the time, and she's constantly throwing materials at me about that. It's just that, Lord, please open that opportunity. And so we're praying about it, and God may do that, but look at what He's already opened up doors that if a decade ago, if you talked about going to China, the students would have gone, this is impossible. God's making the impossibles possible. Let's talk about one of those, and especially this one that's very dear to the heart of Dr. Ralston. Let's introduce the first one of these, and he'll talk to you about that first trip, South Africa.
There's a Shona term. I'm from Zimbabwe, and one of the languages Shona called Mukiwa. I am a Mukiwa. I am a white boy from Africa. I've always joked that on official forms when they give race, I'd like to make a new box, white African American, because that's what I am. I'm a white African, and I live in America, so I'm a white African American. I'm a minority, and I know I've got rights somewhere. And I demand them. In fact, I need to see my congressman today about it. I am the product of missions. In the late 70s, an American missionary came to Harare, Zimbabwe. It was actually Salisbury, Rhodesia back then, and started the first fundamental work in our area of the city. And through the youth group, he primarily targeted teens to begin with to start the ministry. And through that youth group, my sisters and I were saved. We were discipled. And then those of us in that youth group were encouraged to come to the United States and to study at one of the colleges. And that's what a handful of us did. We came over, went to different universities, Bible colleges, to receive our advanced education. So At the age of 18, I stepped onto American soil. It's my first time here in this country, a bit of a shock in some ways. Had to learn a lot of new words because we say things differently in British culture, and began my education. And since then, have remained here in the States. The Lord's allowed me, obviously, to be here at Clearwater for 11 years now. And obviously, part of my life is actually overseas. All my family is still in South Africa. My parents grew up in South Africa. And that's why, finally, this year, I'm excited to be leading this team to South Africa, to actually return and to give to the ministries that gave to me so many years ago. We had the privilege of going to South Africa this year to work with Dave and Julie Rudolph. I grew up with Dave. He was in the youth group that I was in. He returned to Africa just over 20 years ago to begin his ministry there, first in Durban and then now in Cape Town, South Africa. Our focus of the ministry, it's a very sophisticated ministry in Cape Town. They have been very aggressive with church planting. They have a Bible Institute. They now have a camp program. They are breaking off from their main church, which is Everglen Baptist Church, and starting 3 or 4 different works, even 3-4 hours away outside of Cape Town. So they have just done incredible work in the Cape area. What they've asked us to do is to bring primarily a music ministry team, which means it is going to be a little more specialized and it is going to be somewhat of a smaller team. Usually with China the last few years, you've seen us take 30, 40, 50 people. Some of these teams that we're now going to be putting together are going to be smaller, but that doesn't mean that, you might think, well, I won't have an opportunity to go on this team. No, we want you to apply. So if the Lord touches your heart, we really want you to at least get that application into us. Primarily focusing on music. Dr. Burggraff will be going as well. He'll be doing a lot with the actual pastoral team there and teaching them. They want us to do concerts in churches and in schools. There's a great opportunity to get into the public schools. There are Christian schools there in Cape Town, but to get into the public schools, we'd have to put in together kind of a different type of program, but certainly one that leads into giving the gospel, but they're open to that. They're desperate for music philosophy. As with most foreign fields, even though South Africa is a very sophisticated field, in other words, yes, they have electricity and running water. It's very modern down there. But they do want some teaching in music philosophy, and we hope to do that. They also have quite a few talented people in the church. They haven't been able to start a music academy there, but they would like us to kind of do a mini academy the time that we're there with assisting with lessons. So a team of about 14 people. Let me show you a few pictures of the ministry there. This is the main church building of Everglen Baptist. Some of the training that they're doing with the coloreds and blacks. That's just the front of the main church that they have there. We would encourage you to pray about this opportunity. If you have gifts in the area of music, we'd love you to be a part of this team. That will be going right after graduation, pretty much the Monday right after graduation for 2 weeks down to Cape Town, South Africa. Dr. Burggraff will come right now and share a little bit about Metro Mandate.
The next ministry we're going to talk about is almost overlapping with the South African trip, and that is while students may be going across the ocean, some will be at that time in Greece and England, what's going to be happening for those who would like to catch the burden that Ian and several others have expressed already from this chapel, and there's going to be more in the week after the Thanksgiving break, and again in the spring. We're going to be talking much more about this. A trip that will cost perhaps altogether about $1,000, and that is to spend 2 weeks working then in the area of New York City, Philadelphia, working around Pastor Ian McConnell and several other pastors that many of us have come in contact with in the New York City area. We'd be doing about a week in New York and about a week in Philadelphia area. And what that is to catch a burden, to see their ministries, and then even to get connected up for possible internships the following summer. Catching a burden for doing inner city church ministry, working with local churches. You probably, as Ian mentioned when he was here, Pastor McConnell talked about that they actually are working and living out in some of the areas just on the edge of the inner city, traveling in then and helping to establish new works getting off the ground in Philadelphia. But some of those are in the heart of New York City as well, and we'll be working with pastors there as we spread the gospel, help them operate a couple of their programs, youth ministries, etc., and then just catch the burden of how ministry is done there. We need to then bring back some of that here so that we can start doing that ministry next year under Christian Service and that in Tampa and in the St. Pete areas, and that's what we want to do. And they are then different ministries than what we customarily do in suburban churches. And these men have become specialists in that. So we'll be working then this summer in early June in the areas then of Philadelphia, New York, and we're trying to work it so that those of you from the West, we can also do that with Pastor Jason Jans and others in the Denver area as they do church planting. So we'd be working in New York City. And several of the slides or the pictures that we're going to show you today, it's not to capture buildings. But if you will go, and we're going to talk about Budapest, and you talk about Vienna, and when you've been there, and you stand in some of those places, the Citadel, for instance, above the Danube River, looking over Pest and Buda, the two parts of Budapest, and you look over the city, as far as you can see, as far as you can look, all you see are buildings upon homes upon homes, and as far as the eye can behold, and you would be hard-pressed to find one small group of Bible believers anywhere. And so opportunities to minister and to catch the burden for just millions upon millions upon millions of people. Big cities, lots of huge, we think just wealthy because of the buildings and the cars and what you're exposed to, and just this depravity and darkness, and then, as it were, just a poverty of spiritual interest in life. We need to go in there, share the gospel, make an impact. And so as we talk then, those cities that are in our country, it's almost like going in some ways to a foreign land. Let's talk Argentina for a moment.
A year from Christmas, this Christmas, we're hoping to do a trip to Argentina. We did propose one about a year ago to run south in Argentina, and some missionaries that are personal friends of mine, James and Amy Greenwood. They've been on the field about 2 years. They were working with the Souths in Buenos Aires. They're going to be starting a new work in the town of Pilar, which is on one of the sides of Buenos Aires. It is a very wealthy area, and they have a core group already of people, and they're just excited to have a college group come down. So we're looking at right after Christmas going down for about 12 days to Argentina. The program primarily VBS, also with teen singles, canvassing, and pastoral teaching. We hope to take some of our Bible teachers, although they don't know yet. We'd like to take some of our Bible faculty with us, too, to do some pastoral teaching down there in Argentina. But a wonderful opportunity. A huge city, and especially this new town of Pilar that no missionaries are in right now. Very wealthy, the upper echelon of Buenos Aires per se live there. And just a wonderful opportunity to go down there and to share the gospel.
We're showing you these so that as you go home at Thanksgiving, mention this to your family. Start asking your folks to pray with you about the encouragement the school is giving you, whether the faculty and others, for study tours, as well as perhaps then opportunities to do mission opportunities. Start praying about those. They're not that far away. As we mentioned, as Dr. Ralston mentioned, Argentina. It was a year ago at that Christmas break last year that I had an opportunity to go down to Santiago and then deeper into Chile, very close actually down to Antarctica and that region, and having ministry there. And you need to pray about what God would have you do to go and be a part. If the skill sets you already possess, you can use in Argentina, and you can use them perhaps coming up then next summer, a year from now, May 14th through June 2nd, 2009, we'll be going to Europe. If I wasn't ministering in the United States, I believe my heart's desire would be to be in Western Europe. Working in some of these, I've made 20-some trips into this part of the European area, Eastern Europe and into Western Europe. And we know pastors, had an opportunity to train there as well as then bring them to the United States training. A dear friend of mine, Pastor Dr. Steve Davis, his son Tim is here. Tim actually grew up in France and in Romania, and those were his first languages, French, then Romanian, and then English. And you can still talk to him in those languages, but Tim's dad, Steve Davis, who's been here and spoken here, is now living in Paris and operating China with Pastor Dr. Tony Fox, and they operate and do a lot of our China missions from Europe. But they do that because they also, this week, for instance, Steve is in Beirut and in Damascus and having major impact, working, trying to see churches planted in Iraq and Iran. And in order to do that, they're working out of some of those regions. And as we talk about that, a lot of missionaries then towards those countries are coming out of Eastern Europe now. And one of the areas that you need to see what God is doing and catch a burden for is then some of the things going on in Eastern Europe and in Europe. And the other thing, a lot of these missionaries and folks that are in those countries are just looking themselves to be fed spiritually. And so what we're doing is putting together a trip we're calling then a European, for lack of an all-encompassing, we'll just call it Europe. But we're going to focus on the cities of Pécs, Budapest, Vienna, and Paris. And what we will do is we will fly in and minister to missionaries and their churches then in the areas of Pécs. Budapest then is just a few hours away. Vienna and Paris with Jim Canese, Todd Hudson, and those contacts that Steve Davis has then in France. We will be doing music, youth, ministry to pastors and their people then in several of these areas. Let's see, Budapest. Let me back up for just a moment. As we look at Budapest, as I mentioned a moment ago, you look out over this city, and it's just vast. It's like looking over New York, standing on and looking up at the Citadel and that area, that's St. Matthew's. In the foreground there is the Danube River, and one side was the city called Buta, and the other one was Pest, now one large city, and we would move on then to Vienna. Vienna, Austria, a lot of history, a lot of ministry opportunity there to missionaries, and then on to France. My wife actually slipped that one in. When you think of Paris, there's a lot of great things to see in Paris. It's a beautiful area. My favorite city outside of the United States to visit is Paris. And you'd have an opportunity there, though, to catch some cultural opportunity, but also an opportunity to do some great ministry. Let's talk a little bit about the China opportunity.
For the last 4 summers, we've been in China. I know you've heard the testimonies. We gave a presentation a few weeks back about our trip this past summer to the orphanages in China. And as Dr. Burggraff said about Europe, if the Lord didn't have him ministering here, he would be in Europe. If the Lord didn't have me here, I would be in China. I grew up in Africa, and I've traveled pretty much all over the world. But for some reason, God has given me a huge burden for China and for the people of China. For those of you who have gone, you know it's not an easy field. It's not easy for the missionaries to live there under persecution. They have to be very careful about what they're doing. And in fact, pray for the missionaries in China right now because of the Olympics and because people have been so outspoken about what they want to do at the Olympics as far as evangelization, that China has kicked out at least 25 missionary families in the last few months from Beijing, and they've officially said this last week, you might have read the report, that there will be no Bibles at the Olympics this next year. So things are not going well as far as religious freedom. So please pray for that, for China. We will not go to China this coming summer, primarily because of the Olympics. Everything is going to be, they said, at least 8 times more expensive. Beijing will be impossible to travel through because the Olympics will start August 8th, and pretty much the whole summer will shut down as far as people coming in and out for that. So we've elected not to do China this coming summer, but we will certainly pick it back up summer of 2009. I had the privilege of meeting Brian and Victoria Rice on one of my trips earlier this year. They are ministering in Mengza. It's in southern China, right close to Vietnam, about 75 miles from the border of Vietnam, in this small provincial town. It's absolutely beautiful. It's surrounded by mountains, climate very similar to Colorado. No pollution down there, as most Chinese cities are very polluted. And they're just having an amazing impact at Hong Hai University. The project there would be teaching English, and this is with college-age students. Brian's primary ministry there is teaching English and holding Bible studies. He has a core group now of about 25 students that he's led to the Lord, and it's growing. It's really exciting, the work he's doing. Having Bible studies with those believers. They're desperate for teaching. Teaching in village schools. He's made inroads in some of the remote villages. If you've been in China or seen some of those National Geographic kind of pictures, that's exactly what these villages are like. Very primitive, up in the mountains. They have all these very interesting garb that they wear, very colorful. They're very private, very secluded from what's really happening in China, which is China is moving very rapidly, as you've heard, to be a major power. But back in these villages, they're very backward, and he's having opportunities to get into these villages. One of the opportunities we would have would be holding teaching sessions in some of their schools. I saw one of their schools. They weren't in sessions, so I didn't actually get to go in. But they're hungry for learning, and we would have an opportunity to share the gospel there. And then assisting in local orphanages. They have 2 orphanages in Mengzi that they are working in, and there would be opportunities for us as well to do some orphan work. So again, that's 2009, not for a while, but we certainly want to keep China before you. As far as application process, we do have an application for Team South Africa. So if you're interested in at least looking at the details of that trip and applying, please see us for that. Early next semester, January, February, we'll have the Greenwoods come in and present Argentina to you so that you'll actually get to meet them and see the work that they're doing. Why missions? Why should we bother having a missions program? For me, it's very personal. If there was not a missions program from the United States, whether it's college or out of a church or formed agencies, I would not be standing here before you today. Yes, I'm a musician. Yes, I teach music at Clearwater Christian College, but my heart is in the mission field. You might think, well, why should we go for just 2 weeks? What is the impact that I can have on a trip? You do not know the amount of impact that you can have. I remember as a teen, the teams that would come from the United States just blew me away. I mean, the expertise they had, the Bible knowledge they had, the interest that they took in me, this little white boy in Africa, the amount of time they spent with me and then coming back, especially when they would come back on further trips, the relationships, it made a huge difference in my life. And that's just how we can impact kids. The missionaries need support as far as us coming over and supporting the ministry. They need our expertise. Yes, the trips are short, but what we're hoping to do with our missions program is to keep returning to certain fields so that we can have an ongoing relationship with the missionaries and to support the work that we're doing. As leadership, we're delighted to present these to you today. We're thrilled about the opportunities that we have to really go around the globe, and not just with study tours, but with the missions program, and to really tie them hand in hand so that when we do take a study tour, that hopefully there's a missionary along the way that we can support as well. But we'd ask you to prayerfully consider your part in missions. And as Dr. Burggraff said earlier, our hope and prayer is that one trip out of your 4 years, that you would just consider taking one trip. I know for some of you, you'd love to go on every single trip, but we would love for you to consider at least going on one trip. So as you've heard about the different opportunities this morning, please pray about them. Please come and talk to us. We will meet. Dr. Burggraff will be right here afterwards. If you'd like the applications for South Africa, we'd love for you to take those and to pray about it over break. We are going to have to move on that trip pretty quickly. So if you have a desire, please come and talk to us. If you have questions about the other upcoming trips, we'll answer those. Argentina, we will present again, as I said, early next semester, because we will have to form that team pretty quickly, too. Dr. Burggraff.
Well, thank you for your attention. We're going to close here in just a moment, leaving about 5 minutes, because we do have this green form and application for you to at least take home, talk to folks about it. If you're thinking of one of the other trips and you'd like to at least look at an application of what they look like and so that you can prepare or pray about, then just come on up here in a moment. You do know that you can earn credit, college credit for these trips and ministry opportunities. And so it is a wonderful opportunity in two areas. One is what it does to your life And then number two, what it can also do along your curriculum as well. And I do want to mention that over the years, in working with the seminary back in Philadelphia area, what we would do is we would take trips, several a year, and we would be in these foreign countries teaching for a full week, and then another full week doing what we're doing in these trips. And we would take about 18 to 20 students and from the seminary and from Northland, from Maranatha, from Pillsbury College. And for about 6 years then I was taking students several times a year in vans, and we would do Europe and do many of those areas that we're even showing you now. And to a person, those students' lives were never the same when they came back. Many of them are now teachers, went over for a year or two or three, and their major was elementary ed, biology, secondary ed. And what they ended up doing was going over and teaching for a year or two. Some of them even did grad work overseas as a result of just experiencing that, saying, I want to come back to Belgium, come back to Paris, I want to go back to Italy and study. Makes a difference in your life. But above all else, it may be God starting to stir your heart to be salt and light in one of those areas someday, somewhere. What a wonderful opportunity. Let's stand and have a word of prayer. Be dismissed this morning. We have 5 minutes, and when we're done, take the chairs, and those interested, just come up and meet us right here. Thank you, Lord, for these opportunities that are available to us. Students years ago never had such opportunities that we do today. And to whom much is given, much is required. And so we cherish that stewardship and accept the challenge, Lord. May you bless in the lives of those students who've heard these opportunities to stir hearts then to say, this may be something that God would have me do. Lord, I pray that you would make it possible then to those who have even the slightest interest right now to have the resources, the finances, bring those things across their path and in the days and months ahead so that this can become a reality in their lives and be a life changer. Thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.